Welcome to the Sooners360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners360. Each week we catch you up on the latest in OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruit analyst for Sooners360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360-817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month, and there's also a free trial option. And I'm going to be posting all of my regular recruiting content there. The link will also be in the show notes of this podcast. Also, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family. Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is episode 80, Harris and Mix and the Commit Drought. So we always generally lead this podcast with commitments. And for a little while, since Tristan Haynes committed back in, I believe it was May, we haven't had any commitments to talk about. And that has changed. We got 2 commitments over the last couple of days. And let's go ahead and just jump right into them. So the first commitment, I'm going to talk about the second commitment first, kind of talk about them out of order a little bit. So the first commitment was one of the visitors from last weekend, Marcus Harris, the 6'1", 185-pound wide receiver from California, from Mater Dei, the powerhouse, one of the California powerhouses. And the interesting thing about his recruiting process is that OU has been involved with him sort of on the periphery for, most of the year. I think he visited OU probably a couple of times last year. But he hasn't really been in anybody's predictions. I haven't put him in a prediction all year long. He's been really focused more on other schools like UGA, Texas, UCLA, and a host of other programs. And OU's not really been in like his top 5 if he's had one for a while. But all of that changed last Thursday. Apparently, I think UT's kind of been hunting some other wide receivers. I think both UT and UGA are hunting some 5-star guys, trying to get like one of those infamous, 3 5-star wide receiver classes. Texas is very focused on DeCorian Moore and Jamie French. UGA is just sort of keeps hunting for wide receivers that don't really pan out at UGA. So they kind of left a window open, and Emmett Jones is a great recruiter, and don't underestimate what Emmett Jones can accomplish in a 48-hour visit, because Harris went from not really being a factor for this class to committing on Monday and being the 3rd wide receiver added. He had a fantastic weekend. The social media traffic kind of started to build over the weekend. On Saturday, you started to get a sense that, hey, Marcus Harris appears to be having a fantastic time at Oklahoma. Maybe OU can pull this out. Maybe they have a shot at this. So that kind of built to Sunday, where there was, started to be some folks, some of the recruiting services starting to talk about, well, maybe Marcus Harris could be a player to watch to him pulling the trigger on Monday. So Harris is a top 250 composite talent, top 200 composite talent. He was ranked in the top 100 when his ranking started. He's kind of fallen because some bigger receivers, the receiver, every year the receiver group is always extremely talented, and some bigger receivers like Quincy Porter, Carson Cunningham, Jamie French have just sort of moved up in the rankings. And, Marcus Harris is not 6'4", 200 pounds. He's not that big prototype NFL wide receiver that everybody thinks that they need. So he's following the rankings a little bit. I think that's kind of helped OU kind of pull off this sort of amazing verbal commitment out of nowhere process, because I think some other programs have been focusing on maybe some bigger guys that they think are more talented. So, but Marcus is a top 200 talent, and I think he's probably a little bit underrated, and we can talk about that when I talk a little bit about his film. He's really, his film is great. He's making contested catches. He's playing slot. He plays outside. He's showing good speed, not like Zion Reagan's elite speed, but good speed. He's comfortable, playing slot, outside receiver. He does a great job finding holes in coverage. He's willing to go over the middle. He even when he's covered, he's not really covered. He's able to get separation, has just so fundamentally sound, and just able to really make DBs look a little bit silly at times. If I had to make a comp, and I mentioned this a couple of days ago in the written pieces on Patreon, I'd have to go with OU great Sterling Shepard. He's about that size, very similar physical stature, and just one of those guys who just makes plays every time. He makes play after play. If there's one of the highlights, he's throwing a wide receiver screen pass and the blocking just kind of collapses. He's able to quickly find a gap, cut through a seam, and really it should be like a 1 yard gain. He's able to get 13 yards out of it. And I think that's kind of the Sterling Shepard kind of aspect, right? If you remember that Tennessee touchdown reception he made, it looked like he was going to get stopped. There really wasn't anything there. And before you knew it, Sterling was in the end zone scoring a touchdown. The other thing to really consider is that when you're watching his highlights is the level of competition that Marcus is playing at Mater Day. They're playing the top schools in California, plus they're adding a national schedule to what they're doing, similar to IMG. They probably do play IMG. They probably play, probably have a chance. Probably some years they play Bishop Gorman. So, they play the best programs. So when you're watching his highlights, there's no real question about the level of competition. So what does this mean for OU? So this is the third wide receiver commit. So you have Elijah Thomas, Grayson Harris, and now Marcus Harris. So it gives OU 3. I think 4 is probably the sweet spot for OU with wide receiver numbers, although there's been some discussion of maybe going as high as 5. And we'll talk a little bit about why wide receiver numbers might be getting more interesting in a bit here. But, he's a big-time player. He, if he enrolls early, could he be a wide receiver that could see action as a freshman? Absolutely. Even with OU's stacked wide receiver room at slot, if, for instance, let's say Deion Burke blows up this year and goes pro, you could easily see Marcus Harris enrolling early and battling for some time in the slot. So from that addition, he's just extremely talented. And the value add here, to use a kind of a strange term, is that he opens up Mater Day for OU. OU hasn't signed a Mater Day player since Jeremiah Cradell in the Lincoln Riley era. And right after his commitment, Todd Bates was posting on social media, like it's Cali pipeline time. So, OU just offered a 2027 tight end. His last name's Bowman. And he's from Mater Day. And Mater Day has a 2026 offensive lineman who's somewhere in the top 50 in the country right now. So having Marcus Harris there, having the ability to have an alum couldn't hurt OU. It's a little funny for OU to sign. OU currently has more commits from Mater Day than USC. So, to wrap it up right now, adding Marcus Harris to the recruiting class, OU has the 5th ranked class with Rivals, the 7th class with 247, And now they have the number 10 class in the country on on3.com. And that's due to Harris's addition to the OU class. And Lincoln Riley's had a bad week with 5 stars decommitting. So we should probably take it easy on Lincoln Riley. It's not been a good week. So that's the second commit. The first commit was 2026 tight end Ryder mix from the Frisco area. OU offered Ryder early this spring. I kind of fell a little bit under the radar. He's received a bunch of offers. He has over 20 offers, including programs like Ohio State, Michigan, LSU, Miami, Tennessee. So he had a lot of good offers. He is a OU legacy. His dad played baseball for the Sooners. And his high school coach at Frisco is former Sooner wide receiver Travis Wilson, who, if you remember the 2004 season, Travis just had a huge year that year. Big-time receiver for the Sooners from that North Dallas metro area himself. I believe he was from Carrollton. So the recruiting rankings for 2026 is still a little bit in flux. On3 has Ryder as a top 200 player in the nation and the number 10 tight end. He's a high 3-star by the other two services, 247 and Rivals, and ESPN is sort of the latest, has their rankings sort of get figured out later than everybody else. It'll be next summer before their 26 rankings are really worth talking about. His high school footage highlights, the big thing is he's a two-way tight end. He's very willing to block. He's a physical blocker. He's also a very good receiver. He's comfortable being flexed out. He also can play. He's also comfortable being in sort of the H-back position. He's also comfortable being in line. So you can use him in a number of ways. He's very physical, got a good punch to him, good blocker, really good receiver. He's not a blazing fast tight end like former Florida tight end Kyle Pitts. He's not someone like that, but he's got good speed. It wouldn't surprise me if he ran somewhere in the 4.7 territory right now. He's got good size. He's 6'4", 225. That frame can easily carry 245, maybe a little bit more. And you can put him out there based upon the high school highlights and run pass formations. You're not going to tip off what you're doing by having Ryder mix out there. He's equally adept at both. If I was looking for a comp, I would probably go with the tight end that's caused OU fans, a little consternation. First by picking Notre Dame and now by picking Ohio State. His sophomore film is very comparable to Nate Roberts, the Oklahoma high school tight end from Washington, Oklahoma. Again, they both are good blockers, good receivers, physical players. So I think that's a pretty good comp. What does this mean for OU tight end recruiting? This is a big win for Joe John Finley, who's perhaps appropriately been the whipping boy for OU fans, assistant coach recruiting-wise. Joe's not gotten doesn't look like he's going to get one of the big receivers this year for 2025. You have Trinae Washington, who looks good as a flexed out big receiver, sort of flex tight end, but there's no dual purpose big tight end in the class right now, and it does not look like there's going to be one. So to add this to 2026 to the 2026 class this early is huge. It allows OU to contemplate, depending upon how 2025 shakes out, adding a second tight end in the class, because OU really needs to kind of restock the room. Projecting out to 2026 is always difficult, but we know Bowers Sharp will be out of eligibility. Caden Helms, if the rebirth of Caden Caden Helms goes as we all hope it goes, he'll be a senior. You'll have Davon Mitchell, and that looks like by 2026, I think he'll be terrorizing defenses. But the only other tight end would be Cade McIntyre, and he was hurt last fall, and there wasn't a lot of buzz or a lot of talk about Cade McIntyre in spring. So don't really know what you have there. And Cade's not a big framed guy. So, it would really just be, if you were talking about two-way tight ends in 2026, it would be freshman Ryder Mix and junior Davon Mitchell. So big addition, nice ad. Joe John Finley really needed the win, and he was able to get that. So two good commits, one for 25, one for 26. I think I'm not sure we're going to see much more traffic from 26, although there is another day of camps coming up. I know you did has been making a barrel load of offers from the camp session. So something could happen for 2026. It seems funny. We could get another 2027 verbal to join Zane Rowe as well. So, but right now, I think 2025 is where we're anticipating the majority of the action. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the visitors last weekend and what kind of news and notes and updates we have from there. So the big visitor, Michael Fasusi, the 5-star offensive tackle from Louisville. Really with Ty Haywood rescheduling, and we'll get to that in a bit. Really the superstar of the weekend. So his interviews and social media posts post-visit, and his social media during the weekend, really seemed to indicate that OU nailed the visit. His interviews have been very complimentary of OU, what's going on, how he feels about OU, and where OU is in his process. And I think his level of comfort and respect for Bill, I think, is sort of exemplified by him posting the graphic on Twitter with, he's in his OU uniform photo shoot and Bill's with him. And Michael Fasusi simply says, the GOAT. So I think he couldn't have more respect for Bill. And really, OU made a massive move with Fasusi this weekend. Battling Texas, A&M's floating around. I'm not sure if Missouri is going to really make the cut when Mike sits down to decide. But I think OU has made things significantly interesting for Michael Fasusi when everybody really thought of had them trailing before this weekend. I don't imply they've grabbed the lead, but I think they've made everything really, they've tightened everything up. Michael's been OU a number of times. I think getting him back for his official was great because it was something new, because he'd been to OU unofficially, about 5 times between last fall and this year. OU had a big lead for him for, most of last fall and and especially early this year in recruiting. So, they think they reconnected, and, I think if you're an OU fan, you're maybe hoping Michael fell back in love with OU, realized why OU was his previous favorite. But obviously he's a 5-star elite offensive tackle. Texas is not going to go down without throwing everything at him. He canceled his Oregon midweek visit. Will that be rescheduled? It's hard to say. And then he goes to Texas this weekend coming up. So linebacker recruiting has been a little quiet. And now things really got heated up this weekend. OU really loves Elijah Menendez, the linebacker from the Florida area. He's a silent verbal to Miami. He visits Miami next weekend. But all signs are that OU made a massive move here. This is his first visit to Norman. And OU really connected with him, really selling their linebacker expertise between Brent Venables and Zach Alley, and selling just how vital linebacker is for the OU defense, and Brent can sell that Clemson defense too. So it looks like OU made a big move. He's also visited Auburn and Ole Miss. I'm kind of not sure. He's talking about making a final visit after he visits Miami and kind of figuring things out. I think that verbal to Miami is kind of soft, and I think there's a good chance OU could, if he makes a July decision, he could pull the upset here. In my mind, the biggest defensive tackle on OU's board with Trent Wilson. Trent Wilson visited this last weekend as well, but he's also verbaled, was Floyd Boucard. There's a lot of talk about a USC silent commit. That seems to have disappeared. If I had to guess, I would say this is Miami versus OU right now. Remember, Boucard is originally from Canada. He's sort of a exchange student for football down in Miami right now. So he doesn't have a lot of Miami connections or Miami roots. He supposedly has a visit to Oregon coming up this weekend. We'll see if that happens, but Floyd's talking about like a mid-July decision. I think by the time he decides, I think OU will be right there, and it could be a battle OU wins. And I think that would be huge. I think Boucard is going to be ranked top 200, but I think he's really probably, he's right below David Stone level sort of talent, pure talent level. He's so raw. He's raw, but this is the guy Todd Bates could turn into a first-round draft pick easily. I mean, he's 6'4", 295, runs a sub 5.0 40, and just on film, he's explosive. He's fluid. He's everything you want in a big defensive tackle. Speaking of linebacker recruiting, the other linebacker who was in Norman was Mark Hennicher from Narbonne, California. He's a teammate of Jaden O'Neal. He just canceled his Washington visit. He may replace that with another visit. Nothing's been announced or scheduled. But he had a great visit to OU. Looked like he was having a good time. And this really looks like something that OU could use and push if they find linebacker room. Hennicher is a Mike linebacker through and through. If you paired him with Menendez, you could play Menendez, who's also kind of just a physical freak. You could play Menendez at will, and you'd have two physical linebackers. Last guy that OU seems to have made a big move on is Cortez Mills from the Miami area. He just canceled his Miami visit. He seems to be rescheduling that visit to go to LSU instead. There are OU forecasts starting to come in. He seems to really connected with Emmett Jones. Tell me if we've heard that before. And he visited OU for the spring game. So this seems like a connection that might really play out in OU's favor. In other recruiting news, Lamont Rogers is on campus right now, to the best of our knowledge. He doesn't post a lot on social media at all, not on Twitter, not on Instagram. So we think he's on campus. He was supposed to be scheduled. There's no word that he's canceled that visit. So Lamont, do us all a favor and just post one picture of you in your OU uniform from your photo shoot, please. Where is he right now in his recruiting process? It's probably Oklahoma, maybe Missouri, with A&M floating around. I don't think Texas is involved. So I think OU, and Lamont's been to OU a number of times. So just like Fasusi, I think there's a good chance that coming back for an official visit and really having all that personal time with Bill and Brent Venables could reconnect Rogers to why he was maybe had OU out in front before. So this could be a commitment. This could be, of the four guys, this could be one of the guys that has OU out in front and could end up at OU. We still don't have a time frame. He's not going to take any other visits in June. So OU's getting kind of the last shot at him. Well, that's positive visit news from Fasusi and Rogers. Unfortunately, Ty Haywood had to reschedule his visit due to a family emergency. OU wasn't able to get him in this midweek. Imagine their family is still working through whatever issue they're having. And this is not a boondoggle or something. This is a legit problem. Ty Haywood wasn't on some other campus telling OU one thing while visiting Florida or Alabama or, Tennessee or Ohio State. He genuinely had a family crisis, a family emergency. I don't know the crisis. Again, I don't know the circumstances. So the only problem here is if he's scheduled to go to FSU this weekend, if he takes that FSU visit, OU can't reschedule him in June. The dead period starts June 24th and goes to July 24th. No official visits, no in-person contact. The last weekend in July is open, but unless there's been a rule change, you're not able to use that weekend for official visits. And OU kind of learned that lesson the hard way last year with Casey Poe, where OU had sort of set it all up for that July weekend, thought they'd get the last visit with him before he decides in August. The NCAA says, no, you can't do that. And then OU has to hurriedly put together a midweek visit. And then he goes to Alabama, and then he commits to Alabama. So that issue would ideally get resolved by him not going to FSU and coming to Norman this weekend for the Champion Barbecue weekend. Otherwise, it's hard to know what that does to Ty's recruiting. Does he decide to push off a date and try and visit OU in September? Or does he just go ahead and pull the trigger without an OU official visit? And I'm afraid if that were to happen, I think that probably would signal an Alabama commitment, which is a blow because OU seemed to be the leader for Haywood, depending upon who you talk to. As always, it's a very moving ground right now in recruiting with this last weekend coming up, with players committing, players decommitting. So OU's lost 3 visitors that we thought would visit this week and this coming weekend. The first is Andrew Marsh. Does not look like he's going to be attending the Champion Barbecue. That was first reported by the OU Rivals team. And then, again, OU Rivals team, with this reporting that Christian Evans, the defensive tackle from Virginia, is probably going to there's been a bunch of Virginia Tech crystal balls in this week from regional guys, and that looks like it's actually going to pan out, and he's going to choose Virginia Tech and not take the OU visit. I think Marsh not visiting is probably connected to Harris, Verbeling, and the good chance that OU might get Mills. They're very similar wide receivers. Marsh would sort of be overkill. Mills is a top 100 guy right now. So it would be, there's no room for Marsh if OU is going to be able to pull in Cortez Mills. And Marsh's recruiting has been a little all over the place. In terms of Christian Evans, looks like OU maybe had some idea that was happening. Last weekend, they brought in from Atlanta, Mekhi Williams-Lee, 3-tech, really like him on film. So now with Evans not visiting, maybe that moves Williams-Lee back higher on OU's radar. And they're also bringing in UT Verbal from Florida, Brandon Brown, who's a 4-star on Rivals. He's 6'2", 285. Again, probably a 3-tech. Maybe he could be a nose guard. But if I had to guess, I would say you'd probably play him at 3 technique as well. So I guess he could bulk up to be a nose guard to give you 2 nose guards. Brandon Brown being a nose guard, possibly, then Kamori Moore being the big nose guard in the class that's already verbally committed. Lastly, he was supposed to take a midweek visit. There wasn't a lot of buzz about it, but Washington State linebacker Zadrius Rainey Sale is not visiting. He's probably going to choose FSU or the University of Washington. So that's all it for the latest recruiting news. I will be back later this week on Friday with a official visit, Champ-U barbecue breakdown of who's visiting, what's OU's chances, what might happen over the weekend. And I hope to have another long-form podcast, a return to the long-form podcast for you guys, hopefully this weekend. Going to try and see if we can get that scheduled and recorded. So thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a good rating. And we will be back on Friday with a breakdown of who is actually going to show up in Norman for the Champ-U barbecue. Thanks again. Bye-bye.